I'm Ben McGrath. This is the great Buzz Bissinger and the great Megan Abbott. By way of implicating myself in the case that we're, I guess, about to prosecute, I'll mention that I got up early this morning to watch my 5- and 7-year-old sons play hockey on my laptop in a mall up in New York. So I am one of the parents who wasn't fighting in that video, but might have been on the periphery. I thought I would start with asking us about our own experiences in this. Buzz, I think you were telling me yesterday you yourself were a bad sports parent. Is that right?
Yeah, I was a particularly bad sports parent. Actually, just in context, that was a lovely youth softball game that was played in Kingsport, Tennessee in 2018. You can see the parent participation is alive and well. I was a sport parent. I actually texted my son today to see how bad I was, and he informed me that in Little League, I would go out to the mound, and we had arguments on the mound as to how he was pitching. I did redeem myself by giving him an award at the end of the season for being the coach's son. Tennis was, I don't really know. I've thought about why I did this. I mean, during tennis matches, I would get all over him. You got to do this, you got to do that. You're not trying hard enough. You need to be more aggressive. You need to be this, you need to be that. Until finally, of my own volition, I stopped coming, because what was the point? The point was I was only making him more nervous, more apprehensive. I did not have bad intentions, but something comes over parents. You live through your kids, you want your kids to perform, you somehow think it reflects upon you, you're embarrassed if they don't perform, and it can really dangerously spiral out.
And Megan, I think you come at it from watching your own parents, is that right?
Yes, well, I have no athletic ability at all, and as a child, my brother was a very promising baseball player, and most of my childhood was hijacked by Little League, and my parents went to every game, and so therefore I had to go to every game and sit in the stands with a stack of books and watch the spectacle that ensued, and I think my reward was usually that if I behaved well and sat quietly all week at all the games, I would go to Baskin-Robbins and I could get whatever I wanted. And we would wait every year. We couldn't go on summer vacation till we knew if we were advancing, so we had to sort of postpone. That said, I mean, I'm going to be the sort of softer one on parents. My parents were not bad sports parents. They were definitely sports parents. And in many ways, they were, quite supportive and encouraging, but I did lose all my childhood summers to sports.
And yet you chose, in writing about cheer and gymnastics, not to write about baseball, say, which is what you're...
That's right. So I suppose it's my revenge. I do have a younger sibling in my book about gymnastics, the younger sibling of the elite gymnast, who I guess I only realized after I wrote it was like my de facto, I put myself in the book as the unathletic child observing.
Right. Do you think there's a difference between we should talk about the sports dad versus the sports mom? Is there?
No, sports moms may be worse, actually.
Okay.
From what I've read, I mean, I think sports soccer moms are just as bad. I mean, I think any parent who gets involved in their kids, whether it's traveling team, whether it's softball, whether it's baseball, whether it's peewee football, can be and often is, not all the time, a recipe for disaster. I saw up close and personal when I wrote the book Friday Night Lights about high school football in Odessa, Texas, where someone suggested really the subtext should have been fathers and sons. You had sons playing for fathers who had once been great all-state football players. You had fathers trying to make up lost time to sons. And it's not only parents. I think the most abused sport of all time is women's gymnastics, which many of you have read about. Larry Nassar at Michigan State. It's parents, and I have never understood this. Parents will give away young women at the ages of 9, 10, 11 years old. They will go live on their own with coaches who then become father figures, who then often become abusive in one way or another, don't have a period, you got to lose weight, you got to do this, you got to do that. You need to play with a broken arm, broken bones, you're weak, you're lazy, you're out, you're in. And I don't really get it. I don't get it, but I also, being too old and cynical, I don't see it getting any better. Sports may have no redeeming value, and I think you can argue that to some degree, but what sports is completely entrenched in our culture in a way that I don't think we really admit to.
Well, and you mentioned gymnastics, which, of course, Megan has some deep familiarity with. So.
Yes, yeah, I wrote a book about it. It's from the point of view of a mother of an elite gymnast, and this was before the Larry Nassar scandal. Though I am from Michigan and know it very well, intimately. There wasn't. I mean, that was the big scandal, but you heard stuff always in gymnastics. It was always bubbling out there, and the coaches and doctors, these subsidiary figures, can be quite malevolent. And that case is particularly upsetting because a lot of the young women had told their parents what had happened, and so it is a very upsetting story. But I think gymnastics, in addition to ice skating and a few of the other ones, are particularly complicated for young women and girls. I think the body image and the maintenance of the weight and the prevention of reaching, a lot of girls will not, girls and women in gymnastics don't get their period till they're in their late 20s after they've quit. So it can actually deform your body. If girls do it so young now, gymnastics, that it actually changes the shape of their body because it's still in development. That said, I did find, talking to many young female gymnasts, that for them it actually saved them from the perils of what their body meant as young women, because they always felt very confident and comfortable in their body because it was this weapon, it was this tool. So I do think it cuts both ways.
Right. Well, I think it was watching the parents of one of Larry Nassar's victims that you first began thinking about the role of gymnastics.
That's right. I mean, I probably everyone here remembers Allie Reisman's parents, who this was 2 Olympics ago, but there was this sort of viral footage of them in the stands watching her perform at the Olympics. And they were like, they'd be moving this way as her routine would go this way, and it was really humorous and vaguely disturbing. But they were so invested in it, and that it was quite. It was both upsetting and moving to me. I do think it gets really tricky. She felt very supported, though, in fact, now we know all this abuse was going on. And in that case, she had not told her parents, but also I think a lot of the young women in these cases don't feel like they can tell, and they don't even know their body is so much on display and surveilled as these athletes that they don't even necessarily think that there's any point in saying anything. Their bodies are not their own in that way.
Right. Buzz, when you went to Odessa, were you initially thinking that you would focus on the kids or the parents, or who did you grab?
No, I mean, initially, when I went down in 1988, it was really to focus on the kids, but you find out right away the parents, boosters are intimately involved in the fortunes and expectations of the kids. It really hit home the most when I was interviewing, he was head of the Booster Club, and he talked with great pride about his son in 8th grade playing with a broken arm. And he talked about how he obviously had done something to his arm because the arm swelled up so badly that they had to cut off the arm pad. And that yet he kept on playing. And he thought that showed what we often like to derive from sports, at least classically. Machoism, toughness, not quitting, giving everything on the field, and a lot of other bullshit, frankly. But he was really proud, and that really hit me hard. And then there were parents who would feed their kids beer at the age of 9 or 10 because they thought that would bulk them up. This was Odessa, Texas, where they would get 19,000 people to a football game on a Friday night. So this was a place that was very different. But inevitably, some of it was poignant. Some of it was tragic. There was a kid on the team, a great kid. He had a very troubled relationship with his father, who had been a great all-state player, who had personal problems of his own. And he was living with his mother, and he went back to Odessa for his senior year to see if he could prove to his dad that he, too, was a good football player, that he, too, could live in the great shadow of his father. And it didn't work. It didn't work. His father became abusive. It was a horrible relationship. There was one who played in the shadow of his father who had died. His father had died at a very young age of alcoholism. So fathers were everywhere. Mothers were different, but they were almost more fanatic in terms of the team. And it's not just parents and kids. It's referees. Ben and I were talking. 75% of referees in sports quit after 3 years because of the tremendous, not just verbal abuse they suffer, but physical abuse. I mean, there have been instances in Massachusetts of someone getting killed after a hockey game. There have been instances of someone getting their ear bit off in Mississippi. You saw this, a nice, sweet youth softball game descending in complete and utter chaos. It isn't every parent, and I don't think it has to be. I mean, I just don't. I think if kids played these games on their own, they would be every bit as good, and they will also have fun, because fun is pretty much out of the equation. Fun in competitive sports is out of the equation. You need to specialize when you're 5 years old. There are youth baseball teams in Arizona that will play 140 games a year. There are some parents who want their kids to have elbow problems, so they have Tommy John surgery when they're young because they think that'll help their arms become stronger. It's part and parcel of money and ESPN and exposure, and everyone thinks we have an American Idol within them. And a lot of parents think that about their kids in sports.
I would say I think that's a little bit of an overstatement to say that fun is out of the equation, because defensively, as the father of 7 and 5-year-old boys who are playing, I think they're having fun. I do think that what's interesting is the question of when does the line. I mean, I think everyone starts out having fun, or most people start out having fun. Maybe not the 4-year-old gymnast who's been put into it, but at a certain point along the line, it becomes too competitive and maybe ceases to be fun, and it's difficult to figure out when that is. And so it's a process that you slide into.
I think it depends on the skill and level ability of the kid. I think if a kid is 4 or 5 years old and he is identified either by coaches as parents, this kid is really, really good. This kid could be a great swimmer. This could be a great Olympic swimmer. This kid has it in hockey. This kid has it here. This kid has it there. I think the pressure intensifies very, very quickly, as does being put on an incredible pedestal until you're no good. And what happens when you're no good? Anyone remember Bo Jackson? No, you're done. You're over. But I think it really does depend on the skill level. My son played on a traveling soccer team with a coach who was so despicable, so vile, pushed the kids so much, so unnecessarily, that he never played, soccer again. That was supposed to be an elite team. And I do think there are kids who have fun. I mean, I had fun. I went to the Dalton School in New York. We were a bunch of uncoordinated Jewish kids. We played at Randall's Island in New York. The only people who watched us were homeless and fugitives from Rikers Island. And we had fun, and we did. We didn't need parents, and we tried, and no one was the worse for it.
Well, so one of the challenges, I think, is that sports are a social experience, and so you want to say, okay, well, I set myself aside from the super competitive people, and I'm just going to play in the fun league. But the problem is how much fun you have as a kid, or even as a grown-up playing sport, is dependent upon how much confidence you have with respect to the other people you're playing against. And so if everyone else starts playing more, right, and then you decide, well, I just want to play once a week, but all these other people are playing 3 times a week, and they're killing me, then I'm no longer having fun, and then I can't play at all anymore. And Megan and I think we talked about this a little bit. Buzz, you mentioned 1988 and Odessa, Texas, a different time and a different place. I think there's a sense that in the decades since then, that time and that place have kind of bled into everywhere, no?
Yes, I mean, I think the expectations of parents' involvement in their children's life has intensified everywhere. Often we haven't talked that much, but it's implicit in so much of what, Buzz, you're saying, is there's this fantasy of money, right, of scholarship, of opportunity, and it's very hard to separate that out from it as well. There's, these sort of big American dreams of what it can do, and I think that's that's gotten bigger too as celebrity sports culture has sort of, it's writ large now, and it's very hard to separate that out too. So I think, but I do think what you were saying, Ben, is there is this sort of drift, like slow drift. It's like Heart of Darkness, with parents have all the best intentions often when they start, and it's very hard to tell. It was something that I thought about so much in writing about is like when it turns, like when their dream or their fun, their enjoyment, their savoring of this becomes yours, like, and how can you tell what that moment is? For a lot of girls, I growing up, soccer was not, there was no girls soccer, and now it's everywhere, and it's been so empowering for so many young women. So it's such a great thing, and you can see parents becoming invested in their daughter's enjoyment of soccer. But like, when does it turn? And how, there's some like big alarm that goes off. You're too invested. You're too invested. It just doesn't work like that.
Right. Well, and in fact, I think during one of the tennis panel yesterday, I mean, tennis, it's a whole parent genre of its own, which we could talk about, a particularly fraught parent role. But one of the panelists, I think sort of half tongue-in-cheek, talked about, well, I wouldn't want my daughter to be a professional tennis player, but it's fine if she gets a college scholarship. And I think the danger is that everyone actually tries to articulate it that way. Even the people who are secretly thinking they're going to go to the pros will tell all the other parents among the 8-year-olds on the court that it's all for a college scholarship. And so, in fact, there's just a numbers game problem. The number of people who are in it for a college scholarship is 15 times as great as the number of college scholarships there are, which leads to this kind of hyper competitiveness that goes. When Buzz, I was one archetype I think of where it can be tricky to suss out the sort of the evil from the good intentions. I think of in terms of is like the quarterback parent, say, like in the TV show based on your book. I think there's a quarterback parent who tends to be the person with all the money, who's sort of bankrolling the program on the side, and it's sort of it's seen as a charitable thing on the one hand, but it's sinister because it's all to prop up his own child.
Yeah, and that certainly is going on. I mean, the great epic stories, the Hoosiers type story of the small town team from Indiana beating the big team from Indianapolis, the great West Texas small town teams of Odessa, beating the big boys of Houston and Dallas. That's over, and that's over because of money. The suburbs now rule. Allen, Texas, they built a football stadium for $68 million. The only problem with it had structural flaws, and they had to redo most of it. But these parents have money, so what these parents do is, beyond coaches, they hired specialized coaches, whether it's for your quarterback, how to throw, how to run, how to read the option, how to do this, how to do that. I think we, in a sense, and look, we're up here, we spout these generalizations, but we almost have a fantasy of greatness now for all of us. We all have to be great in something. We're all great in something. It's not enough to like something. I teach it at Penn and liberal arts, teaching writing, and these kids are frantic. Where am I going to get a job? How am I going to be great? How am I going to do this? The idea of trying something simply because you like it and you might want to do it and you might excel in it is completely alien to them. And I think it's rife in sports. And I do think if you think your kid is good, if you think your kid is really good, some bad alchemy at some point or another, whether it's a parent, whether it's a mom, whether it's a dad, whether it's a coach, is going to take over. There are some great parents, but the world is legion with people who had very difficult parents and suffered for it. Mickey Mantle. Mickey Mantle was a very troubled individual, but his father was ruthless. Ruthless. Mickey, come on. You got to learn how to switch hit. You got to learn how to switch it. Dad, I'm tired. No, let's do it. Let's do it. Andre Agassi hated tennis. Hated it because of the relationship with his father. And you know what? There are exceptions. Venus and Serena Williams' father, Richard Williams, was, and I think racism had to do with it, was completely castigated by the mostly white tennis hierarchy. He doesn't know what he's doing. He's teaching his kids wrong. How can he hate them out of the junior circuit? But he actually knew what he was talking about. But the skill level, I think every kid who's good, every parent really thinks he's going to make it. He's going to get that college scholarship. He's going to go into the pros. And the problem is you're really selling kids a bag of shit. And you're really selling minority kids a big bag of shit. Because they buy into that dream more than ever. Because where do you see role models if you're a minority? You see them in the newspapers. You see black athletes. And Gates of Harvard did this. He talked to a group of kids and he said, what do you think you have a better chance of being a pro basketball player or a lawyer? Basketball player. What do you think you have a better chance of becoming, a doctor or a pro football player? Pro football player. Which obviously is not the case, but it's this constant feeding of dreams. It's this constant, you're great, you're great, you're great. You get further removed from the real world. You're constantly on a pedestal. You're constantly coddled until the talent goes. And frankly, no one gives a shit anymore. Because ultimately in sports, you are always, always replaceable. Don't forget that. You are always, always replaceable, and you will be replaced. And so what parents feed their kids can be wonderful, can be a wonderful relationship, but it can be really, really corrosive and I think dangerous.
The contrast between Mickey Mantle's father and Richard Williams is interesting to me in that it seems to show the emergence of a new trend, which is right. You had before the archetype was the sort of the overbearing father who was just sort of like, you got to be better, you're going to do this. With Richard Williams, you see the beginning of a different kind of father who is a marketer, a sort of a salesman for his kids. It's not so much just about making sure they're out there, but talking them up and kind of making it inevitable that they're...
Right.
And now you have, because of social media, you have parents out there who are basically... It's more like Joe Jackson and the Jackson 5. Basically, they're stage parents. They're kind of creating...
Well, it's the momager. It's really the Kardashian
right.
model.
Yeah.
There's this whole economic stream for cheerleaders that's they call them the cheerlebrities of Instagram, and these are cheerleaders who are at the college level and have sort of monetized their persona and their moves and their athleticism and to get sponsorships on Instagram. And there's a cheer mom and a cheer daughter, sometimes a cheer dad and a cheer daughter, and they basically will be, it's all spawn as they call it. They're sponsored, and so some of them have millions of followers, and so they are actually making money. That will end too, of course, when they no longer can do that bow and arrow, but it is sort of a fascinating new development. And I do think it's very different. It has less to do with sport, though these are very powerful athletes, but has to do with the celebrity culture that we've kind of got wrapped in that Buzz referred to.
Well, and you mentioned that, I was thinking of, there's a family called the Newmans in Florida. The father, they're a basketball family. There's the boy is named Julian and the daughter's named Jaden, I think, and he had them, dribbling sort of Harlem Globetrotter style tricks on talk shows when they were 5 and 6, kind of like just the way Tiger Woods was doing that. But the difference is, unlike Tiger Woods, who was destined to become a great golfer, the Newman children suffer from the fact that their father is about 5'5". So they're not going to become, like, they were amazing 5-year-old basketball players and pretty amazing 10-year-old basketball players and, only pretty good 14-year-old basketball players. And but the father, they have a brand. It's called Prodigy. They sell the Prodigy brand streetwear, and they've got a kind of an online television series kind of self-produced about themselves. And I think the argument there is sort of like, well, you're right, athletes are disposable, but at the end of it, these kids won't make the pros, but they'll still have, 1 million Instagram followers. Now the question is, what do you do with that?
Frankly, I'm offended. I don't know what the problem is with a 5'5" basketball team.
Nor do
I don't know what you're talking about. I mean, really, we can.
You may be better than I.
We can. No, I never knew that.
Yeah.
And I know there are people here who are really experts in tennis, and I sort of throw it out. But my sense is, kids who are identified at the earliest age for greatness almost never ever make it. I know there are exceptions, but in what I've read, 5, 6, 7, you go to the Nick Bollettieri camp, you're taken away from your parents, tennis, and they throw in a little academics here and there. They are not the ones who make it, because you know what happens too? You burn out. You end up hating the sport. You're sick of it. You have a stunted life. And, You know, when you were mentioning, God forbid, that Kris Jenner starts an all Kardashian NBA basketball team, but it may be coming, and there's a certain darkness to me. I admit that, but I don't. I admit that, but I don't know what I've thought about this. I don't know what the answer is. I mean, I don't know. Maybe instead of kids trying out, the parents have to try out as well. You give them a Rorschach test. You give them various psychological batteries. Have you ever been convicted of a felony? Have you ever hit anybody? But I don't know how you're going to keep parents out. I mean, I thought, other parents can be a monitor for this, if a parent is going out of control. But the problem is, if you approach that parent publicly and you say, you got to knock it off, you're going to have a fight. You're going to have a fight. You're going to have inevitably some parent who says, it's none of your fucking business. It's none of your fucking business. So I don't know. There was, and I think Ben read this as well, there was he was a referee from Oklahoma who was so physically abused by parents, he actually started a website, or a website on Facebook called Offside, in which he would show clips of parents behaving terribly. And apparently it did work. It did shame parents into calming down to some degree. So maybe it sort of is this public shaming and keeping on parents. But you're never, ever, as we move deeper into the celebrity culture, deeper into the YouTube culture, deeper into everything is on tape, everything can be seen, everyone is a star, it's going to be very, very hard to contain.
I do think that the Larry Nassar case has had an impact. I think that those victim statements that the gymnasts, that day long when they all came in and their outrage was so intense and immense, I think that does have an impact, that their parents had not protected them. And in fact, so many of them, had sort of just turned the other way. So I think that kind of, it would be nice to think that the child athletes themselves would somehow lead this. And I do know some school systems have instituted codes now and have tried to be more vigilant in their regard. That's very complicated in places where the school system depends on the success of a team, but in other ones, I think that can be a help.
When Buzz, you mentioned earlier, you said that everyone in our culture today, everyone wants to be great at something, which reminded me of so my wife, who's out here somewhere, grew up without any sports in her life. Her father's an academic, her mom was a piano teacher, but she played violin. And she, now as we are sort of wading into the world of youth sports and talking about these things all the time, she sees this as not unique to sports actually at all, and it's violin culture to her, and so the violin parents aren't fighting each other, but they are as competitive and as demanding about how much you must practice.
Yes.
It's the Tiger parent phenomenon,
No,
which is now
that
That would be so cool, though, a brawl during intermission of a concert. Right. That would be so great.
banging each other. Yeah.
That would be so cool.
Yeah.
Well, I know that ballet parents can be very intense too. I do think the arts, you do see in the arts, my parents were not alone in being very involved in my academics. So I do think, I don't know if any of you have read Andrew Solomon's book, Far From the Tree, which is about complicated parent-child relationships. And there's a chapter on prodigies, but other sort of different problematic ones. And I do think it's not limited to sports, but maybe the stakes feel a little higher. And I guess the physical toll can be more immense. Maybe that's the way to step.
But I'm sure I know what happens in music. It happens in sports. It happens in academics. Because look, if you're getting extolled as a child, if you're making your mother and father proud for whatever it is, and it happens to be in sports, you do feel good about that. You feel wonderful about that. You feel a high about that. And the difficulty is no kid, excuse me, wants to disappoint their parent.
Yeah.
I mean, you don't. My son didn't want to disappoint me. But when I convey that, he feels 10 times worse. And the joy of playing something, or even the competition, the great thrill and competition of playing something, I think becomes diminished. He just wanted to get the hell off the field. He wanted to get away from me. I don't want to do this anymore. This is not fun. This is not competitive. This is terrible.
Well, and that brings up the notions of sort of exploitation and consent, which I think about when we're talking about kids and sports in general, which is either the kids are being exploited by their parents or potentially by the storytellers. And I think one of the reasons that parents end up looming so large in the stories we tell about youth sports is that the writers or the storytellers, they need to approach the parents because the kids aren't capable of giving consent for their own stories. And in a certain sense, we are sometimes absolving ourselves of the responsibility for these kids and for what we're doing with them by going through their parents. And it's sort of like, well, if the parent wants to speak on behalf of the child and make an ass of himself, then I don't have to feel bad for humiliating this family. You have that advantage as a fiction writer,
yes.
where you get to go in. You don't have to worry quite as much about exploiting or
no, that's right.
getting the consent of your
lawsuits. Yes. No, it does sort of let you off the hook, though. I mean, certainly have had many conversations with parents after writing these books, but it does get very complicated with these young female athletes because it is different in many ways in terms of the power that it gives young women that they would not have otherwise. There's sort of a strong sense of self, and often I did have a lot of parents come up to me and say very firmly that they felt very proud of what they had given their daughter because they had given her this the sense that she felt fully in control of herself in ways she never would have had she not had this. That they felt that they were actually supporting her in a sort of slightly fantastical feminist fashion. It does get very, very tricky. But they do have good defenses. The parents that have come up to me, it's always very convincing in the moment. And I don't go home with them since but I'm sure, Buzz, you have, less, I'm sure you've heard from countless parents.
Yeah, I mean, as a result of writing Friday Night Lights, and of course they talk to me and they say, I would never do any of the things that are in the book. I want you to know that never happens. But Ben raises a point that I don't think we really do want to address. I mean, I think journalism is inherent exploitation. It is. It's inherent.
Well, this is the Janet Malcolm argument, right?
But you do. You want people to tell you things. You want them. Now you don't lie to them, but you want people to tell their intimate secrets. And I can tell you honestly, when I wrote Friday Night Lights and I'm dealing with 17 or 18-year-olds, I did not want parents anywhere near any of these interviews because then it would be censored or then they wouldn't say things. Did I exploit them? Did I make a group of anonymous kids, at least some of those, into more than Andy Warhol 15-minute heroes? Are they known today by name? The answer is yes. In most cases, was it fun for them? Yes. But in the case of the protagonist of the book, Boobie Miles, it was horrendous. Absolutely horrendous. He was a black running back who was hurt before the season, never played, great athlete, completely tragic, and is now back in prison. And yet you will see pro football players wearing his number. You will see rap songs written about him. He will go to a shopping mall and he will be stopped once the movie was made and the TV show. And he didn't get anything out of it, not a fucking dime, although I have helped him out in the past. And did I exploit him? Probably. Did I try to make it up? I have, but his life is a wreck. And what would his life have been if no one knew, frankly, who he was? Would he have been better able to move on? He was never, ever able, because of parents, because of his uncle, because of coaches, because of me, because of fans, because of other parents. Boobie Miles was never, ever able to move on in his life. He was forever haunted by those 4 or 5 worst words of all to an athlete, which is what could have been. And I saw it firsthand.
And I can vouch for that point directly. When, 25 years or so after Buzz did his book, I immersed myself in the life of a suburban New Jersey high school football powerhouse who, like, Buzz mentions the Boosters. This is the team that drew from 3 states, a Catholic school, and they would raise money and get on planes, and they would fly to California and fly to Alabama and to beat, all the powerhouses around the country and prove that New Jersey football was in fact better than Texas football. And the main protagonist in my piece was then a sophomore named Jabril Peppers, who used to walk around the campus saying, "Call me Booby," based on Booby Miles. And I, at the time, thought, well, this is kind of tragic. He doesn't even realize that Booby Miles is the tragic figure of that story. Like, the point is, Booby Miles gets hurt, breaks his leg, never goes on to anything. Why, if you're the up-and-coming sophomore, are you saying, he's my hero? The positive, and in Jabril's case, it was a similar. His brother had been murdered in a gang hit in Newark when he was in 8th grade. His father was in prison. He had a wonderful mother who was a preacher, and they had been, in the way that often happens in these things, they had, one of the white coaches on the team had set them up with an apartment in a richer town so they could live closer to the school. The positive end to that story, unlike in Booby's case, is that Jabril Peppers now is on the New York Giants. He's the rare kid who actually made it through and is look, he's playing football. He might end up brain damaged. He might yet end up hurt, but he's done better with his life than Booby through good fortune, I guess. Did you have any observations about racial? For racial dynamics are huge in Buzz's story in the cheer world.
Not in terms of the parent culture, but it certainly it certainly looms very large, and girls and young women are always sort of the spectacle in a way that different than when men are playing sports. So it certainly comes up a lot for instance, in gymnastics, where there's sort of the two physical types. There's the sort of very sort of lithe and petite and sort of like a fawn-like figure, and then there's like the powerhouses, the corkers that have the big muscles, and there's that often takes on racial connotations, as we've seen with Venus and Serena Williams, sort of the presentation of their body and of muscle. So I think it certainly is a factor there. In terms of the parent culture, I have not noticed it as much.
Were you inspired at all by the famous Texas case of the mother who put out a hit on a cheerleader?
Well, it is a favorite of mine, yeah.
Because she was taking her daughter's place. Was that the inspiration at all for your book?
It's an excellent TV movie with Holly Hunter, I believe. Yes, that's what Texas has the best cheerleading stories as well as the best football stories I have found. No, it's so interesting. The cheerleaders that I talked to and so much of the culture, there's this sort of, they were so proud of their wounds, and sometimes when I was on tour for that book, the young women would show me their where they had back surgery, and they were almost like Marines wanting to show their war wounds. It did have a different flavor. I think for them they were really proud of it, though they of course have no protective equipment at all. They don't have helmets, they don't have padding, and they will jump from 25 feet in the air. When we've been shooting this show that based on the book, and when I saw it, when I was up, they put me at the top of one of those pyramids to show me how high it felt like. They did not ask for my permission, I must say, in advance, but it was terrifying. So there is this sort of, for young women, this desperado feature that is an interesting new development.
I remember when I was in Odessa, I was interviewing someone, and they had a 5-year-old daughter who was dressed from top to bottom in a cheerleader uniform with pom-poms, doing incredibly skilled cheers. And I said to myself, either I get the fuck out of here right now and go back to the East Coast, or somehow steer through it. It was just a mind-boggling culture today. But when I read your excerpt, I was shocked at the number of injuries that they sustained. And even when I was in Odessa, you could feel this was the next promised land. Now it's going to be cheerleading. Now it's going to be something else. Now it's going to be something else. Now it's going to be something else. Racially, obviously minority parents care passionately, and I would argue it's because we give minority communities, particularly the African American community, very, very few role models. Most of those role models are in sports. You go on the sports page, and that you will routinely see African American men and women extolled. And I think in many ways it's the most disappointing blow for all when they don't make it, because they really do have this warped idea as to how easy it's going to be. And it's impossibly hard. And you know what? The average shelf life of an NFL player, does anyone know? 3 years. 3 years. 3 years. And we're not talking about tens of millions of dollars a year. 3 years. Now, the NBA shifts, but I've read studies, this was several years ago, I admit, The number of percentage of NBA players who are bankrupt, 50%. They don't know, instead of parents or coaches or any of us teaching them the practicalities of life, they don't know they have to pay taxes. They immediately buy houses for their mother, which is great, their father, which is great, but then their entire posse. And then they get a paycheck, and they say, well, where did it go? And then 10% goes to their agent. And, for many, many athletes, even if you make the pros, that's life. If you're a Division I athlete in college, you will not find a single Division I athlete in college who is not convinced that he is going to go into the pros, even if there's no shot. And that can become really corrosive, and it's changed. I think it's changed. In the 1940s, when college football was the biggest thing in the country, it was bigger than baseball. It was much bigger than the pros, and no one went into pro football. That was never an aspiration, so you had to study. Never an aspiration. Pro football was considered, that's where people, the brain dead went, the disenfranchised went, the unsavory went. And coaches were preaching something of a morality of you've got to study. You got to study, and frankly, if you didn't study, you got kicked out. But that's never going to happen today, ever.
One thing we hadn't mentioned, which made me think of that, is that in a lot of these sports, gymnastics is one, ice skating is another, the amount of debt that some of the parents will go into because it's so expensive to have that sport, to get the private lessons or to have the ice time. And so not only they're not going to probably get the scholarship, but now their family has a second mortgage or a third, as they put themselves in.
Well, I was thinking
and
that from a different, which is what you mentioned, like in basketball, I think we have the illusion that some sports are really expensive and other ones aren't.
Yeah.
But actually, it costs I don't know what the number is, but $1 million or $2 million to create a professional player, no matter what you're doing. And it's just that in some sports it comes from other places. So in basketball, and this probably helps explain why so many of the players run into financial problems later. The money is being handled sort of behind the scenes by sneaker executives and street agents and these sort of shadow parent figures, because the parents themselves often don't have the money that's required to fly. All those kids, when they're 12, by the way, it's not just when they get to college. When they're 12, they're every other weekend they're going to Nevada or Salt Lake City or Tampa or whatever to tournaments. And then they're playing 120 games a year, beginning when they're 10. And that costs a huge amount of money, and someone is paying it, but they've grown up not having to pay it themselves, and so that it's just this path has been put before them, but it's been corrupted from, it's been professionalized basically beginning when they're in third grade.
Or in the cases of parents are laying it out themselves, then the child has the added guilt that not only are they being all this pressure, but they have the pressure that their parents have basically sacrificed their finances, so that it's all riding on them. So I cannot imagine that level of probably some of you know that Tanya Harding is a good example of being a terrible sports mother, but she is someone that really memorably portrayed in the movie I, Tanya. Her mother held that over her, how much she had sacrificed to get her daughter that ice time.
But look, I think some parents have it right. I remember Cam Newton, who was the great football player, the great quarterback from Notre Dame, and is now at Carolina. I remember his father publicly saying, my son, we deserve $250,000 from Auburn. And, people were shocked. What about the amateur ideal? What about this? That's payoff, that's extortion. Well, he was exactly right. Think how much money Cam Newton made for Auburn University. Think how much money he made for coaches. And I think some parents have it right. I think Richard Williams had it right. You know what? You're not going to exploit my daughters. I'm not doing it the way it was done. I'm not going up the junior circuit. I want my kids to be as special and make as much money as they can. And they were right, because a lot of athletes are completely exploited. And I think more and more parents are realizing that. And then you have sneaker companies, and then it becomes more and more under the table. When his father said, I want some cash. You're exploiting my kid. You're making tens of millions of dollars on my kids. I go to these games and I see, all these kids and men and women, they all got my son's name on the back of a uniform and some jersey that they bought for $50. What the hell am I getting out of that? It's wrong. Completely wrong. So I think some parents are protecting their kids, We're not going to you're not going to go into the financial abyss, and you're not going to get screwed. Because at the end of the day, you guys play the game. It's not Nick Saban who makes, what, $9-10 million a year. It's not. It's not. It's the kids, it's players. It's not the coaches.
You know, a few years after Buzz's book came out, there was a great book written about the world of high school basketball by a writer named Darcy Frey. It's called The Last Shot. And he follows the Lincoln Rail Splitters, I think is their name. It's a high school in Coney Island, in the projects in Coney Island, as they're going on sort of to try and win the New York State Championship. And one of the players on that team was a 8th grader or 9th grader, like a freshman named Stephon Marbury, who then went on, some of you may know, to become an NBA star. But in that book, Marbury is kind of more of a peripheral character, in part because Frey writes about the fact that early on in the reporting, Marbury's parents approached him, Frey, and said, you know, pay up. If you want the interview, you know, what's in it for us? And that, you know, to Buzz, I think what you're suggesting is that they were, you know, maybe they had a point.
Look, there's no way Friday Night Lights would have been written today, because that's what happened, and I couldn't necessarily argue against it. I'm sure that when I approach kids, the parents would be immediately there and said, what's the compensation? I'm not giving away my story. That's not happening. And what would I have done? Would I have paid them ethically? You know, I could not. I think I was lucky that in the 1980s, this kind of sort of a, you know, American Idol obsession, and everyone's a star and everyone's a reality star, that was not yet in play. But frankly, if Boobie Miles' uncle, during the time I wrote the book, had said, you know, we should get something from this, I could not really argue against it. But, you know, maybe you guys can help it. Maybe you can help us out, or help me out. I'm trying to still figure out, why was it so fucking important to me that my son excel? I'm serious, though, because I'm sure you have how many of you are parents? I hope most of you actually. I don't really give a shit about that, but I just thought I'd ask. But how many of you have had kids who have played sports? Wow. How many of you have acted in obscene ways that you greatly regret? Oh, you're so full of shit on you. Bad group. Get the next ones in. I'll ask you guys, but why? Why? Now, because I don't think you're going to be that way, because you work for the New Yorker and you're a nice guy. I worked for Vanity Fair and I was an asshole, so, you know, it makes sense. But why was it so important?
Do you think it would have been with daughters, or I was trying to keep bringing gender into it, but I do wonder if that.
It's a good question. I don't know. I don't know. I actually think I would think that if I had a daughter who was a really good athlete, it would be somewhat the same.
Yeah.
Why do I want them? Why is it such a reflection upon me? Am I that insecure? Is it the general nature of parenting? Do we always live through our kids? Is it a reflection upon us? Now, I have to say that I had a youngest son who was a terrible athlete who hated sports, but we made him play soccer. But he would, but he was a goalie, and the fields were back to back. And you know, in youth soccer as a goalie, nothing ever happens. So he would spend all his time talking to the goalie in the field right next to him. And I would, if the ball came in his direction, I would kind of gently let him know that a ball is coming, maybe you should at least act like you give a shit. So, I wasn't that bad.
That would have been me. That would have been me.
But I really was, I was terrible to my son. I was. I mean, you know, we would make up, and I think he understood, but I don't get it. I mean, arguing on a, you know, Little League mound, about what?
I think we have a few minutes. We should probably let the audience have a chance for some questions.
Sure.
He's waiting for the microphone.
Yeah, just so I can hear.
Did you see the television program Friday Night Tykes about the youth football
It was
in San Antonio?
No, it was sort of a semi-rip-off of the whole Friday Night Lights syndrome, but I did not see it. I think Esquire magazine did it. It sounded fairly loathsome, actually, in terms of the abuse and the pressure heaped on kids. I mean, I think that was the point of it, was it not? Right. Right. Well,
We have a question over here. This is for Buzz. How did you feel about the film and TV adaptations of your work? Do you think they got it right, particularly with the parents?
Look, I've said this, and I believe this. I know a lot of authors complain. I mean, I think the beauty of creative forms are books are different from films that are different from television shows. Each accomplish things that are magnificent that can't be done. Obviously, in a book, you do have the ability to delve much more in depth on certain subjects, whether it was race, whether it was socioeconomics, whether it was gender. Having said that, I thought the film was good. I thought the film was very good. Now, truth in advertising, it was directed by my cousin. But that had nothing to do with me. It didn't. Honestly, it didn't. Pete Berg, who's a very accomplished director and has done Lone Survivor and some terrific movies. I thought it was good, but Pete was very honest. He said, I cannot make, the stuff about race in the book is phenomenal. I cannot make a movie about race. It'll never be shown. I have to telegraph it. I have to show it in little dribs and drabs, which he did. The other thing he did, and I thought the movie was really good at conveying, it goes to your point, the pressure being put on these kids from all direction. What it's like when you're 17, 16, 18 years old, and you are carrying the hopes and dreams of a forsaken town on their shoulders. That was real. And to watch those kids rise to that challenge in the midst of it was really ennobling. They were amazing. The other thing that he did was, took 14 years to make this film, which is frankly not that long in Hollywood. There were many scripts written. In each of them, they had the team winning at the end. Hollywood was convinced that you cannot have a movie in which your team loses at the end, which happens in the book. And the one thing I did say to Pete was, if you have them winning, don't make the movie, because then you have completely missed the point of the book. And fortunately, Pete said, there's much more drama in losing than there is in winning. And the fact that they've lost and you've seen what they've gone through makes it all the more poignant and really tragic. I didn't watch a lot of the TV show. I was a little bit Friday Night Lighted out. I met with the writers. It was clear to me right away. It was a great group of writers. The showrunner, Jason Katims, really had his shit together. And they made a really, really good TV series that was much more about relationships, in many ways about marriage, than it was about football. The musical is coming out. We'll go to Boston first and then Philadelphia. We're going to do it. And New Haven, we're going to do it old-fashioned, but look for it a year from this spring.
It's a weird coincidence, but Pete Berg is one of the executive producers on the show that based on my cheerleading
What are you talking
novel.
about? Talk about your show coming.
There's a connection. They're very, very different, but I like the notion that there's this lineage.
Well, Megan has a show.
It's on USA.
Yes, it's
Network?
on the USA Network. It just premiered. It's called Dare Me, and it's based on my cheerleading novel. And Pete Berg was one of the early champions. His production company, Film 44, and I really think so. I'm the co-showrunner on it, so I have only myself to blame for the inaccuracies. So.
That's wonderful.
Hi, Mike Downer from Key West. Great panel, by the way. I have a question about the college admissions scandal, which erupted last year. 50 people have been charged with being involved with getting kids into colleges. Many of those were were advertised as athletes, but they weren't. And it seems to me that that some of the dynamics you're talking about are very much related to that. So I'd be interested in your perspective.
Yeah, I'm embarrassed that we didn't actually bring it up.
Yeah.
Or,
Great point.
if I'm remembering right, it was like, a person who was supposedly a soccer star who didn't actually play soccer.
And there was a
person, crew,
lacrosse, and there was a crew. There were several,
And the thing that guy knew what he was doing. That guy realized that every major college has a group of ridiculous sports that they offer. Like, why does Stanford have a fucking sailing team? I'm serious. But why? I mean, have it, you know, nice sailing or... And he realized in many cases, you pick those fringe sports where they don't have a lot of money, but they want great teams and they can't really do recruiting, and that's where the fertile ground is. And it was a really, really smart model until he got nailed. In other words, the case of the Yale soccer team and some big sports. But in most cases, it was minor sports where they were willing to take a chance on kids that they actually hadn't seen play until they met them, and they would say, gee, you're an incredible sailor. And the kid would say, what are you talking about? I've never sailed in my life.
Right.
And that's how it got.
Well, it's reminded that there are certain sports, like squash is one, I think,
Right.
that have always been known as like a pathway to the Ivy League. It's sort of because there are only about 1,500 people who play squash, and 900 of them go to Ivy League colleges at some
Yes.
point in their lives. Or Trinity. Trinity is a big squash.
But there's an interesting, sort of what we're going back to, I mean, one of the reasons that it got so much attention was that they were celebrities' children's, and I think it is this weird collision of the celebrity and Instagram famous daughter of one of them and the sports. So I do think maybe it is sort of, we should have talked the whole time about this. This is very good.
That's true.
That's a great question.
One more question
We
in
have
the
a question
back
up
there,
top.
the man with his hand up.
Oh, up in the balcony, is that right? Or no? There's a guy up there, I think.
That's a big hand up there.
Thank you very much. I'm a head coach of a cross-country program that has over 100 kids on it. What parameters would you establish to both promote a healthy and an enjoyable experience for the kids, but also to sort of keep the parents in a positive space?
Yeah, cross-country kids are goody-goodies. You have nothing to worry about. It's actually true. I think kids, you know, what the hell do I know? But I think kids in track and cross-country, at least I saw this when I was working on a story on the Duke lacrosse scandal, they had much less problems, track had much less problems than any of the other sports. Is it fun? I mean, you know, you're the head coach. What kind of dynamic do you say? Look, you have a difficult situation. You want to win, right? You want to win, but you do have, it's incumbent upon you and your responsibility to balance that with not making it excessive. If you make it excessive, you're going to have problems because that's going to bleed onto the kids. The fact that you have 100 kids is fantastic. It sounds like they're really, really, you know, self-motivated, and I think it's possible to send out a massive message. You know, we want to kick their ass, but at the end of the day, how you perform, how you do, how you feel about yourself, the pride you take not simply in yourself but your teammates, the fact that you gave it all on the field, that's fantastic. And that's really what's going to last you in life. And there'll be tears and there'll be cries. And look, there are a lot of coaches and parents who do it right. They love their kids. They love sports. They love their winning. But they know when it's time to step back. Because honestly, you don't want to not care about winning, because then you're not being effective as a coach. That's what makes it you know, so complicated. So take a few puffs of weed before the game. You know, just chill, you know, a few shots of booze, you'll be good. You know, your kids will really respect you. You won't win a fucking match, but your kids will really respect you.
Yeah.